Welcome back, viewers, to Sahara TV. My name is David Miskias. In March, Kenya will be returning to the polls for their presidential elections, as well as the first time that they're going to be voting for gubernatorial and senatorial elections at those levels. Also, there was the first ever presidential debate held in the nation and broadcast live. So with us today is news anchor and reporter for KTN, as well as an investigative journalist, John Allan Namu. He previously worked for the Nation Media Group as a news anchor and investigative journalist. Mr. Namu received a bachelor's degree from the United States International University in Nairobi. He's taking the time to give us a breakdown on some pertinent issues to the election, as well as how the country is feeling considering the aftermath of the contentious elections in 2007-2008. Briefly, before I introduce John and we continue with the interview, I'd like to enter this segment with a clip of that very historic presidential debate.
History has been made in East and Central Africa as Kenya conducted the first ever public presidential candidates debate ahead of the 4th March elections. The debate, which lasted 2 hours, was a platform for the 8 contenders of the job to explain their policies on issues ranging from education, health, national security, and governance to the 44 million Kenyans.
We have a new constitution now. That new constitution is very clear on what it requires of all of us as Kenyans. My job as president is to ensure that that constitution is implemented.
The Luos could not vote for Kibaki because it was a Kikuyu, and no Luo can vote for a Kikuyu. I said, Kikuyus are Kenyans, and there was never a war between Luos and Kikuyus. And I managed to campaign for Kibaki, that Kibaki got majority of votes.
The Constitution makes it very clear that communities that have hitherto been marginalized must not be marginalized. So the solution lies in implementing the Constitution to the letter.
Perception that because you're from community X, you have no problem, others are the ones having a problem. I think it's perpetuated more by leadership. We have to own up as leaders, take responsibility, and lead people out of this.
An associate professor at the Department of Political Science, Makerere University, Philip Kasaija, thinks that the debate is a great milestone for Kenya's democracy.
It is a first for Kenya, it is a first for East Africa. And I think that shows the level of progress in terms of the development of the regional politics, that we also now are catching on with these democratic principles.
Yet other political analysts have viewed the debate as one that will be revisited for accountability purposes for the win of the polls.
You are pledging before the public what you want to do, and they will ask you to account for what you said in the public.
Unlike in the United States, where the debates have to some extent influenced the electorate, there are questions whether it will have the same impact in a country dominated by politics based on personality and ethnicity.
Presidential debates may not necessarily sway the electorate, which has already made up its mind, but who knows? I mean, those undecided voters may be persuaded by the demeanor, by the presentations, by the delivery of the candidates.
Uganda attempted to organize a presidential debate in the previous elections, but the candidates refused to attend. Ndebesa says that the success of Kenya's debate is one that Uganda needs to reflect on come 2016.
Next time, it should be provided for in the electoral law that there will be other rallies and assemblies plus the televised debate between the candidates, so that it is a legal requirement and nobody will abstain from, refuse to attend.
The Kenyan presidential debate cost a whopping 9 billion Uganda shillings and was hosted at Brockhouse International School Auditorium in Nairobi. The candidates will again have another face-to-face encounter on February 25th. Solomon Serwanja, NTV.
That, viewers, was a clip of the historic presidential debates held in Kenya. Now, our guest, John Allan Namu, is here with us via Skype from Kenya. Mr. Namu, thank you so much for being with us today on Sahara TV.
No problem.
So, as we just saw and has been listed, this was the first and a very historic presidential debate for Kenya, and I read that around the country, many people were very excited to tune in either through social media or to watch it live. Was that reflected in the numbers that you covered on KTN?
Well, yes, it was an exciting time for the country. Of course, this being the first nationally televised presidential debate in the country's history. And I think the third in Africa's history. It was a very momentous occasion for everybody, and there's going to be a second one as well. It was also a good opportunity for people to get a taste of what their candidates' actual policies and positions are on various issues, from tribalism to the International Criminal Court. So all around, I think everybody was impressed with the debate, to the extent that it was the first and it was conducted well. A few complaints that it wasn't broadcast in Kiswahili, which is our national language, and thereby would have been a little more palatable to the large mass of Kenyans. But all the same, it was a good debate.
So yeah, actually, you mentioned some complaints. One of the things I noticed that you mentioned that the candidates kind of laid out their issues very well. I saw some critics mention in a number of articles after the debate that some of the candidates and sometimes the issues weren't that clear. I mean, I know in other presidential debates and even government debates around the world, especially here in the U.S., a lot of times the candidates don't really give very many substantive answers. Did you see a vast difference here? Even there was some criticism I noticed from people who watched the debates in Kenya saying that they really didn't give me enough to go on of what these candidates truly stand for. And also there was a report on exit polls of people that had watched the debate saying that, yes, it was very historic and very exciting, which is a great first step, but it really didn't change a lot of people's views as far as they had already had their mind set upon the candidates they were going to choose.
Yeah, I mean, to answer your first question, I think the reason why a lot of the candidates couldn't really get into the more nuanced pieces of their policies is because of the design of a debate in general. Even in the United States, it's very difficult to get right down to the brass tacks and into the very detail of what President Obama's policies or Mitt Romney's policies are in specific. And that, I think, was the same issue here. Although, to be honest, I also felt that some of the candidates skirted around some of the issues that were addressed to them. For instance, the issue of the International Criminal Court, as well as handling corruption and spending in government. Those were things that across the board also were felt to not have been answered properly, David.
Yeah, and also you just mentioned the International Criminal Court, which I know was brought up numerous times throughout the debates, especially to the two Kenyatta and his running mate William Ruto, as far as they being two of the four individuals that are currently set to start a case there or be on trial there in April of this year. And there was a large question of how, you know, he's running for president now, and how is it going to be if, let's say, he does win the election, that he's going to be essentially running the country from the Netherlands. I mean, I know one of the candidates took the time to point out that he thought that was impossible. Big news, though, the Kenyan High Court did say that despite this charge by the ICC, that they cleared Kenyatta and his running mate to participate in these elections. Was that a big surprise to you and other news networks and the Kenyans in general, or was that expected?
Well, it was generally expected that there would be clearance by the High Court in terms of because I think the question before the High Court was really whether they can run based on the charges preferred against them, and they went back. If I can just reduce it down to the basic ruling, was that they are innocent until proven guilty. And also relying upon the fact that they were cleared by the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission to run in the first place, and the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission has its own set of rules that people who want to vie must abide by. I think those two things in combination made it sort of clear for a lot of the people who are following the case that their eligibility would probably not be challenged at the level of the High Court, and that's exactly what happened. I think the judges who are on the bench, if I'm not wrong, said that the people who'd be able to rule on that eligibility maybe at a later date would be the Supreme Court. So it wasn't really a surprise, at least not for me, David.
Okay. Now, one question is Kaneda, I mean, of course, say he were to become president, essentially being a head of state would give him immunity even from a potential ruling on the ICC that was not in his favor. Has there been any speculation that that's not necessarily the reason that he's running, but one of the things that he's not necessarily worried about when he says, oh, yes, I'll be able to, balance should I win the working to defend myself in the trial as well as run the country? I mean, is there a question that, well, once he's president, essentially he will be given immunity, and even if the ICC does rule, it's not going to be enforced?
Actually, I don't think the question is about immunity, so to speak, because the Rome Statute does not give head of state immunity anymore. If someone has been charged with crimes committed while they were president or before they became president, head of state immunity no longer applies. I think the question is whether Uhuru Kenyatta, once he becomes president, will cooperate with the International Criminal Court, and quite frankly, going on his statements and going by how his defense has acted, I don't think that is really a possibility. He has committed publicly that he will abide by the requirements of the International Criminal Court and go forward. What I believe is happening now is that the slight possibility that he could decide not to run, or rather not to abide by the International Criminal Court's rules, is being played up into some as political mileage or as a political tool by some of his opponents to hit at him. But the reality is that even if, for instance, Raila Odinga were to become president and say, as he has said, that he does not want anybody tried at The Hague, or he would prefer people being tried at home, that is actually also a challenge to the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction, and that could also trigger the sort of response that people are talking about. So it's an argument that's being looked at from only the point of view of Uhuru Kenyatta's defense, but it really is an argument that should be looked at holistically. If any presidential candidate won the day and decided not to abide by the rules of the International Criminal Court, that would put Kenya in a very interesting and very tough legal position, and that's not coming out enough, David.
Yeah. I mean, it'll be really interesting to see. I mean, we're just a couple months really off of the trial date start in April. One of the other major issues that's been brought up numerous times, and especially since the aftermath of the 2007-2008 elections, has been two things. I mean, one, the post-election violence that occurred, as well as corruption. I mean, I know in this debate as well that candidates were asked, how would you deal with corruption that does seem to run in some reports rather endemic in some political areas, as well as with the judiciary system and the police, which some have led to believe, reports came out in 2010, that would allege the existing corruption in the judiciary system is what led the politicians who, instead of being able to feel that the court would give them reprieve when to challenge the electoral results, they took to the streets saying that the judges and the judiciary was too corrupt to give me a fair shot. Has there been anything, I mean, is that what you saw then, and has there been anything done to remediate any of that?
Well, yeah, that's what happened in 2007, at least from the point of view of the Orange Democratic Movement. They felt that the judicial system was not strong enough to withstand any sort of influence from the executive that held government at that time, which was led by Mwai Kibaki. But that really is neither here nor there, because there really were a number of reforms, even leading up to the 2007 election, that had taken place that could have made the judiciary suitably fit to try the election dispute. But having said that, there has been quite a bit that has happened between 2007 and 2013, which is the year we're in now, with respect to building the judiciary credibility of the judiciary. We have a new Chief Justice. We have a Supreme Court. We have and there are sections of the court that are allowed to hear particularly electoral disputes. as well as a number of issues that have been taking place over the period in terms of vetting of judges and magistrates, to ensure that the face of the judiciary is representative of the credibility that all Kenyans would want to see. So I believe that there is a lot more, a good measure of confidence in the credibility of the judiciary now. So that I don't think is something that will be challenged, especially because of the kind of person who was elected as or rather who was appointed as the Chief Justice. Dr. Willie Mutunga has a very strong history in civil rights and in civil rights from a legal perspective. That's been his background, and a lot of people have a lot of faith in him as a person. He may not be able to solve any of the problems that would be presented in an election, but the mere fact that he is there has served to give Kenyans a lot of confidence in the judiciary.
Okay, so we are running a little short on time, so I'd just like to get in a few more questions. One big thing, of course, along with the judiciary was the police corruption, and police corruption in light of the post-election violence that occurred. Reports came out that in the election itself, over 1,100 to 1,200 people unfortunately were killed in the post-election violence. 600,000 were displaced. Now, a report has come out that shows of over 400 of them were actually shot by police, and there were other instances of police moving against protesters rather aggressively. Have you seen a change in the police that would guarantee the ability for them to handle or contain any potential violence that may occur post-election? I'm not saying it will, but you never know until post-election, depending on the result.
Well, the same that has happened in the judiciary has sort of happened with the police. There's been a lot of discussion about what will happen in the police force should there be another challenge, and there's been a lot of interest in the police force, both publicly and from the civil society. Right now, we have Inspector General, a position that hadn't existed before. And was created really out of the need to harmonize some of the functions of the various arms of the police force. We had different arms of the police force before then, and that kind of divisiveness in terms of who to report to was also an issue. So there have been a number of things that have happened with respect to the police force and making it strong enough to be able to face any challenge that might come from the electoral process. But having said that, there still is a bit of a confidence gap between the people and the police,
right?
Because it takes a lot more to reform the police force than to reform the judiciary. There are a lot more members, and corruption ate away at the credibility of the police force for years, decades actually, and that's something that's going to be very difficult to redress. But the police, the new Inspector General says that he's up to the task, and we can only wait and see, David.
Okay. So along those lines, how have you felt as far as the agitation of the Kenyan people on the ground? I mean, I know there's been reports on violence, not necessarily surrounding or related to this election, but there was violence in September in Mombasa. There was some tribal violence back in August, clashes, and some people are saying that this, along the lines of security issues, Al-Shabaab has unfortunately struck in Kenya numerous times. Just the other day, and they made a video demanding the release of they call Muslims that are being held illegally in Kenyan prisons. They've threatened violence again over that. Along that, I'd like to tag on a reported 40% unemployment in the country and deep inequality between the regions. Now, of course, we do have tribal lines being broken down with the two favored candidates in the polls, Prime Minister Raila Odinga representing the Luo and Uhuru Kenyatta representing the Kikuyu. Now, do you see, as far as on the ground, agitation that would, are people taking extra steps to say, like, we're not going to do this time, we're going to take certain things, or do you see that there could be a possibility of a repeat?
Actually, that is the big elephant in the room. I'd say, not speaking as an investigative journalist, I've heard a number of issues I've heard of a number of issues and complaints from the ground that are rather unsettling, and the problem is really what you addressed in your question, the problem of inequity, the fact that we have so many young people who are unemployed, living below the poverty line, very smart people who are looking for opportunities but can't find them. These things are the issues that give me sleepless nights as a journalist, because I don't feel that they are being addressed adequately. I don't feel that the youth as a group or as part of the Kenyan population are being spoken to in a manner that would allow them to feel that they are part and parcel of one Kenya. That is the big problem. That is the big issue. And I'm just speaking from my own experience on the ground. If there were to be a problem, that is where it would come from thousands of disaffected young people. And the signs of this have manifested over these past 5 years. I mean, before 2007 there was the Mungiki, but inside informal settlements we're now hearing of clashes between different groups of young people, gangs really. At the coast, the majority of the people who make up the Mombasa Republican Council are young people. Everywhere there has been a flashpoint, you've seen young, disaffected men and women who are right at the heart of it. And that is both a challenge for the next government as well as this government in trying to contain any sort of disaffection that could spill over into violence, David.
Okay, thank you, John. Just one final question. It's a two-part. One, I'd just like to hear your own ideas and how you're going to, or what you hope to see in this election, both in the process as far as what's going to happen on the ground. I mean, is Kenyan society prepared as far as the polling stations, everything like that, and what you hope to see come out of this election? And then I'd like to know a little about what, and from where are you going to be covering the election?
I'm going to be covering the election from Nairobi, but I could be deployed anywhere, really. But what I'd like to see, more importantly, I think is what a large majority of Kenyans would like to see. Peaceful, first of all, violence-free election that has all the hallmarks of a credible democratic process that is transparent, and an electoral body that is responsive to the mood of the country in terms of trying to get the results out as quickly and as credibly as possible. So that, because all polls point to the fact that there may be a runoff, I think the handling of results right now would be very, very crucial. And I believe the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission is up to the task, to the extent that they've really tried this time around to make things as transparent and as credible as possible, even inviting candidates beforehand into the tallying center and showing them what the process of counting is going to be like. The tallying center itself will be a place that's open to our cameras and our journalists to be able to see just exactly what happens. That used to be a very forbidden fortress at every election. And the reason why credibility would be challenged was because of some sort of lack of transparency from the electoral bodies in the past about what's going on. That, I think, is something that's being handled exceedingly well, in my opinion. But that's really what Kenyans want to see. Free, fair, transparent election handled by a credible electoral body. And finally, let me just say this, candidates accepting the will of the people and a smooth transition to another government, David.
Thank you, John. Viewers, that was John Allan Namu of KTN in Kenya. He was with us today to discuss the upcoming elections in Kenya and some of the things that have been going on the ground, including their very first historic presidential debate. Now, the elections themselves will be coming up in March, and they will be covered here at SaharaTV. We will be reporting on that. So definitely in the next 2.5 weeks, do stay tuned with us for that coverage. Thank you, John, very much for being with us here today at SaharaTV.
All right. Thank you, David. It's my pleasure.
If you're not informed,
If you don't know where you come from, you will never find where you're going.
When Nigeria is working, we will all know.
PDP and us